Elena's eyes snapped open before she understood why. The ceiling above her was not her ceiling. That was the first thing her brain registered, not panic, not confusion, just a flat, cold fact. The ceiling above her was wrong. It was high and cream-colored and edged with the kind of fine detail that you only found in buildings that had never needed to think about money. A single chandelier hung from the center, unlit, its crystal drops catching the early morning light from somewhere behind her. She lay still for exactly 3 seconds. Then she sat up, and the full weight of where she was landed on her like a wave of cold water. The room was enormous, not large in the way that hotel rooms were large, where every inch was carefully arranged to look bigger than it was. This room was simply large, in the honest, unconcerned way of a space that had never needed to perform. Heavy curtains framed floor-to-ceiling windows on the far wall. Through the gap where the curtains did not quite meet, she could see a stretch of green lawn, a wall of old trees, and the glassy surface of a private lake catching the early sun in long, golden strips. She was still wearing her catering uniform. The collar felt stiff against her neck. One of her shoes was on her right foot, the other was missing. She spotted it near the foot of the bed, lying on its side as though it had simply fallen off while she slept, tired of the whole business. Elena swung her legs off the bed and pressed her feet against the floor. The floor was marble. Cold and smooth and utterly certain of itself. She stood up slowly, smoothed the front of her uniform out of habit, and looked around the room with the kind of careful attention that arrives after the first rush of alarm has passed and the mind begins trying to actually solve a problem. She did not touch anything. She did not open any drawers or look behind any doors. She simply stood in the center of the room and understood with growing clarity that she had walked through the wrong door the night before, found the most expensive-looking bed she had ever seen, and slept in it for what felt like a very long time. Her phone, she needed her phone. She found it in her uniform pocket, completely dead. She pressed the side button twice as if that might help. It did not help. She found her missing shoe, put it on, and began trying to remember exactly which direction she had come from the night before. The corridor outside had been dimly lit. She had turned left or possibly right. Her shift supervisor, a tired-looking man named Gary, had pointed down the hall and said, "Third door on the left." She had been so exhausted that she had not counted carefully. Elena crossed the room, reached the door, and pressed the handle down as quietly as she could. The door opened. The corridor outside was wide and carpeted in a deep, dark color that made everything feel very quiet. The walls were lined with framed artwork, not prints, not copies, but the kind of paintings that had weight and presence even from a distance, the kind you did not get to look at without an appointment in most places. Tall windows at the far end of the corridor let in clean white morning light. She stepped out and pulled the door shut behind her. Then she turned left, toward what she believed was the direction she had come from the night before. She had taken about 4 steps when a man appeared from around the corner ahead of her. He was not a small man. He was built the way that certain people who spend their lives in responsible positions are built, solid, contained, giving the impression of measured strength held entirely in check. His dark jacket was immaculate at 7 in the morning. His eyes went to her face, then to the door she had just closed, then back to her face, all in the space of about 1 second. Elena stopped walking. The man also stopped. They looked at each other across approximately 6 feet of carpeted corridor. "Good morning," Elena said, because her mother had raised her to be polite even in the most confusing situations, and this was certainly one of those. The man's expression did not change. "Good morning," he said. His voice was low and even. "May I ask where you are going?" "I'm trying to find the exit," she said, "or a staircase. I'm not entirely sure which direction I came from last night. I work for the staffing agency. I was placed with the catering crew for the event." He looked at her for a moment. "Your name?" Elena Morris." She reached for her work badge on instinct, then remembered she had clipped it to her bag, which she had left with the other staff bags in the ground floor locker area before the shift. Her bag. She had left without her bag. "I also," she added, "left my bag downstairs somewhere, in the staff locker area if there is one." "There is," the man said. He did not move. "My phone is in my bag," she continued, "which is why I could not call anyone." She paused. "I realize this looks very unusual." "It is very unusual," the man agreed without any particular emphasis. He was not aggressive, he was not warm. He was simply present in the way that certain people were present fully, and without any wasted energy. I was told the rest room was the third door on the left, she said. I am not sure I counted correctly. He tilted his head slightly. You were not in the rest room. I know that now. A pause stretched between them. Down the corridor, somewhere in the distance, Elena could hear the faint sounds of a household beginning its morning, a door closing, the muffled movement of footsteps on another floor, the low hum of a kitchen waking up. Wait here, please, the man said. He turned and walked back around the corner. Elena stood where she was. She thought about not waiting. She looked toward the other end of the corridor, where a staircase railing was just barely visible at the very edge of her sight. Then she thought about what it would look like if she ran, and she decided that running was significantly worse than whatever waiting would bring. She waited. 3 minutes passed. She counted them in her head. The man came back around the corner. Behind him, walking with the unhurried ease of someone who had decided exactly how fast he was going to walk and was not going to be changed on the matter, was someone else entirely. The man who came around the corner was not what Elena would have expected from anyone who owned a room that looked like the one she had just left. She had built up a vague image in her head while she waited, someone older, perhaps, or someone who led with visible authority, the way that wealthy men in films led with visible authority, loudly and with a great deal of deliberate presence. This man was none of those things. He was perhaps in his mid-30s. He was tall and well-built, but not in a way that announced itself. His dark hair was neat. His expression was composed in a way that went deeper than just a face. It was composure that came from the inside, the kind that did not require effort because it had long since become natural. He wore a dark shirt and trousers, and looked as if he had been awake for several hours already, not because he looked tired, but because he had the quality of someone who had already thought through their day before most people had opened their eyes. He stopped a few feet away from Elena and looked at her. Elena stood straight. She had learned early in her catering career that standing straight when she was nervous was better than any other option. It did not eliminate the nerves, it just gave them less room to show. You are the one from the staffing agency, the man said. It was not a question. Yes, she said. Elena Morris. I worked the catering crew last night. I was looking for the staff rest area and I found the wrong room. She kept her voice steady. I am very sorry for the intrusion. I did not touch anything. I would like to collect my bag from the staff area and let myself out, if that is all right. The man looked at her for a moment, then he looked past her at the closed door, then he looked back at her. How did you sleep? He said. Elena blinked. Of all the things she had prepared herself to hear, an accusation, a question about what she had seen or touched, a demand for her agency details, that was not it. I'm sorry, she said. You slept in that room for roughly 11 hours, he said. How did you sleep? Elena took a breath. Very well, actually, she said honestly, until I woke up and understood where I was, which was not very well at all. The corner of the man's mouth moved. It was not quite a smile. It was the suggestion of one held at a careful distance. Are you going to call the agency? She asked. I have not decided yet, he said. That was not a reassuring answer, but it was an honest one, and Elena found, somewhat against her better judgment, that she appreciated honest answers even when they were not the ones she wanted. Come downstairs, the man said. Your bag will be retrieved. You have not eaten. She stared at him. You are offering me breakfast. I am observing that you have not eaten, he said, and turned and walked toward the staircase. Elena stood for a moment. She looked at the man he had arrived with, who was now standing slightly to the side, looking at nothing in particular, with the skilled invisibility of someone who had learned to be present without being obtrusive. Is he always like this? She asked him before she could stop herself. The man's expression did not change, but something in it shifted very slightly. Like what? He said. Like that, she said. Yes, he said. Then he gestured toward the staircase. Elena followed. The staircase was wide and curved, and the kind of thing that made you stand up straighter just by being on it. The ground floor opened into a space that she had passed through the night before in the noise and movement of the event, and which looked entirely different in the quiet morning light. The high ceilings, the stone floors, the proportions of the rooms that led off in either direction, all of it had the quality of a place built by people who understood that real power did not need to shout. She was led to a dining room that could have held 40 people comfortably and was currently set for one. She was not sure if it had been set for one because he had been planning to eat alone, or because someone had very quickly reset it for two in the time it had taken them to walk down the corridor. She suspected the second, and was unsettled by how quickly that had apparently been organized. She sat down across from the man at a table that was far too large for a simple morning conversation, and tried to remember the last time she had eaten. Dinner the previous afternoon before her shift, that was more than 14 hours ago. A plate arrived in front of her without her asking for anything. Eggs, toast, sliced fruit, a small pot of tea. Simple, well-made, not showy. She ate because she was genuinely hungry and because refusing felt both rude and foolish. The man across the table drank coffee and reviewed documents in a folder. He did not make a performance of ignoring her. He simply did not make a performance of paying attention to her, either. He just existed in the space without any apparent need to explain himself, and she found it oddly easy to eat without feeling watched. After a few minutes, without looking up from his papers, he asked her what agency she worked through. She told him. He asked how long she had been in the catering industry. She told him that too, 4 years. She had started just after she turned 23 when her brother had been accepted into university and their finances had required a quick rethinking. Your brother, he said, and it was not exactly a question. He is studying environmental engineering, she said. Final year, he is very good at it. She was not sure why she added the last part. She always added the last part when she mentioned her brother. She was proud of him in the way that people were proud of someone they had invested in quietly and without any expectation of being thanked for it. The man looked up from his papers then, just briefly, and looked at her. There was something in the look that she could not quite name. Not pity, there was none of that. Something more like recognition, though what he might be recognizing, she had no idea. You were passed over for a promotion, he said. She set her fork down. How do you know that? Gloria mentioned it. He said it without emphasis, as if this were a perfectly normal thing to know about someone he had met 11 minutes ago. Elena thought about what it meant that he had apparently spoken to Gloria already, the agency director who was, in Elena's experience, almost impossible to reach on the phone on a good day, and filed it under things she would think about more carefully later. I have been passed over twice, she said, and kept her voice neutral. The position was given to someone with less experience and stronger connections. Did you complain? No, she picked her fork back up. I did not see the point, I just worked harder. He was quiet for a moment, then he went back to his papers. Elena finished her breakfast. The tea was excellent. Outside the tall dining room windows, the grounds of the estate were lit in full morning sun, and a man she could barely see at this distance was moving along the edge of the garden with the patient focus of someone who cared about the state of a hedge. She was in the home of someone very powerful. She did not know his name. He had not told her his name, and she had not asked, because somewhere in the early minutes of their strange morning meeting she had understood that she already knew it, in the way that you knew certain things without being told them, not from evidence, but from the weight of everything around her. She knew the name Carrero the way most people who worked in the event industry in this city knew it. You did not work events at this level without hearing it eventually. It was the kind of name that appeared at the edges of conversations and then disappeared quickly, the way certain topics had a polite boundary around them that everyone respected without being asked. She did not say the name out loud, he did not offer it. When she finished eating, she thanked him and meant it. She asked again about her bag. It arrived within 2 minutes, carried by a young member of the household staff who set it down beside her chair and left without a word. She checked her phone, still dead. She would need to charge it when she got home. She stood and straightened her uniform for what felt like the 100th time. I will leave you to your morning, she said. Thank you for breakfast. I am sorry again about the room. He looked up at her from his documents. In the full morning light, with the noise of the previous night entirely gone, she could see his face clearly for the first time. There was a quality to it that she would think about later, when she was back in her apartment and her phone was charging and the day had returned to its normal shape. Not warmth exactly, though it was not cold either. Something more like depth, the sense of a great deal happening behind a surface that had learned to stay very still. The third door on the left, he said. She tilted her head. Your supervisor told you the third door on the left, he said. The staff rest area is the third door on the right. It is an easy mistake in dim lighting. She thought about this for a moment. Does that mean it was not my fault? She said. It means Gary needs to give Claro directions, he said. Elena picked up her bag. She walked to the door of the dining room. She turned back once because some instinct told her to. He had already returned to his documents. She left the estate through the front entrance, which a member of staff held open for her without being asked, and walked down the long driveway to the road in the full morning sun, with her dead phone in her hand and her bag on her shoulder, and the very strong feeling that something had just happened that she did not yet have a name for. She would find a name for it. She was good at figuring out problems when she gave them enough time. She had 4 years of catering experience and a very tired brain and a brother who needed his last semester paid for, and she had, somehow, just eaten breakfast at the table of the most quietly powerful man she had ever been in a room with. She reached the road. She flagged down a passing bus. She found a seat near the back and sat down and pressed her dead phone against her knee and looked out the window as the estate gates disappeared behind the trees. Whatever had just happened, it was not nothing. She was certain of that. Gloria called before Elena had even reached her building. She heard the phone ring as she stepped off the bus, which meant it had found a charge somewhere between the estate and the road, a small mystery she did not stop to investigate. She answered it on the second ring. Elena. Gloria's voice had a quality Elena had never heard from her in 4 years of working with the agency. It was careful. It was warm in a deliberate way, the warmth of someone who was being very conscious of how they sounded. How are you feeling this morning? I hope you had a good rest. Elena stopped walking on the pavement. A pigeon moved out of her way. I had an interesting night, she said. Yes, a pause. I heard there was a small mix-up with the room assignments. A small one, Elena agreed. I want you to know, Gloria said, and the careful warmth in her voice deepened considerably, that we have full confidence in your professionalism. We always have, and we want to make sure you know that. Elena began walking again. I appreciate that, Gloria. We will be processing your pay for the full overnight hours, Gloria said, including the additional hours after your shift officially ended. Elena did a quiet calculation. That was significantly more than she had expected. And, Gloria continued, I wanted to let you know that there will be a formal note added to your file. Something about, let me find the exact wording, an outstanding display of professional conduct under unusual circumstances. Elena stopped again. A woman with a pushchair had to move around her on the pavement. Elena barely noticed. Who added that note? She said. Another pause, shorter this time. It came through the client, Gloria said, through the estate's management office. She said it in the tone of someone reading from a script they found slightly confusing but were committed to delivering correctly. I see, Elena said. You are one of our best, Elena, Gloria said, in a rush, as if she had been wanting to say it and had finally found the opening. We should have said so before now. I should have said so. Elena thought about the 2 promotions. She thought about the candidates with the right connections. She thought about 4 years of working late and arriving early and never once hearing any version of this particular sentence from Gloria. Yes, Elena said pleasantly, you should have. Gloria did not say anything for a moment. Then she said goodbye and ended the call. Elena stood on the pavement for a moment, her phone in her hand, the morning sun on the back of her neck, thinking about what it meant that a man she had known for a single strange breakfast had managed to arrange, in the time between her leaving the dining table and reaching the road, what 4 years of hard work had not managed to produce. She went home. Her apartment was small and clean, and exactly what she had been able to afford while also covering her brother's tuition. She had made it comfortable with effort rather than money, a good lamp, a bookshelf that covered most of one wall, a kitchen that was tiny but functional. She liked it. It was honest in a way that some more expensive places were not. She charged her phone. She made her own tea. She sat at the small kitchen table and tried to think through the morning in the way she thought through event logistics, from the beginning in order, identifying each element clearly. She had made an honest mistake. She had handled it calmly. She had been treated with unexpected consideration by someone who had every right to be difficult about the situation and had chosen not to be. He had fed her breakfast, retrieved her bag, protected her job record, and added money to her pay without being asked. She did not know exactly who he was. She knew the name. She understood enough from 4 years in the event industry about what the name meant, and she was sensible enough to understand that knowing the general shape of a thing was not the same as understanding the details of it. What she knew was this: he had gone out of his way to take care of her situation, and she did not know why. She thought about his face across the breakfast table, the stillness of it, the way he had asked about her brother without any of the usual social decoration, no "oh, how lovely" or "that must be wonderful for you." Just a direct question followed by direct attention to the answer. She finished her tea. She put her uniform in the laundry. She took a long shower and changed into her own clothes and felt immediately more herself. 3 days passed. She worked 2 shifts during those 3 days, a corporate networking lunch on a Tuesday and a birthday party for someone's grandmother on a Wednesday that ran long because the grandmother's favorite musician had been booked as a surprise and had arrived an hour late. Elena managed both events with her usual calm efficiency. She did not tell anyone about the estate. She did not mention the breakfast. She carried the whole episode in the back of her mind, the way you carried something that had not yet resolved itself into a clear shape. On the 4th day, while she was sitting at home organizing her invoices for the month, a knock came at her door. She was not expecting anyone. She opened the door to find a man she had not seen before. He was middle-aged, composed, and dressed with the understated precision that she was already beginning to associate with that particular household. He was holding a cream-colored envelope. "Elena Morris," he said. "Yes," she said. He extended the envelope. "From the estate," he said, and left without further explanation. She closed the door and opened the envelope at her kitchen table. Inside was a business card, plain, cream-colored, with a phone number only, no name, no company, no address. And a handwritten note, written in a clear, firm hand, that said, "I am looking for an event coordinator for a private function in 3 weeks. You came recommended." The initial at the bottom was DC. Elena read it twice. Then she said, out loud to no one, "He recommended me to himself." She sat with the card and the note for a long time. She had 2 reasons to say yes and 1 large, complicated reason to say no. The 2 reasons to say yes were practical and immediate. The pay would be good, she knew this without being told, because everything about the estate operated at a level where money was not argued over, and her brother's final semester fees were due in 6 weeks. The 1 complicated reason to say no was harder to put into words, but had to do with the fact that she was a practical person who preferred to operate in clear, understandable situations, and there was nothing clear or understandable about this situation. She turned the card over in her hands. She thought about Victor Brandt, whose name she had recognized from an industry newsletter 2 years ago, a man who had underpaid his catering crew at a major conference and blamed it on an accounting error. She thought about Gloria's sudden warmth on the phone. She thought about the way the man at the estate had not introduced himself and had not asked her to pretend she did not know who he was. She thought about the breakfast, the quiet, honest quality of it, with no performance on either side. She picked up her phone. She dialed the number on the card. It rang once. "Elena Morris," said the voice on the other end, not a question. He had been expecting her call and he had not pretended otherwise. For a reason she could not entirely explain, that was what made her trust him enough to say yes. "Tell me what you need for the event," she said. He told her. She asked 4 questions, 1 about the guest count, 1 about the dietary requirements, 1 about the timeline, and 1 about the venue layout. He answered all 4 directly and fully. No hedging, no vagueness, no "we will figure that out later." Real information given honestly. "All right," she said, "I can do this." "Good," he said. "I will need full access to the household staff schedules and the vendor list you have used previously," she said. "You will have it by tomorrow morning," he said. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for calling back," he said, and ended the call. Elena set her phone down on the table. She picked up her planning notebook, opened it to a fresh page, and wrote the date at the top. Beneath it she wrote, "Private event, Carrero Estate, 3 weeks, 40 guests." She underlined the date. Then she turned to the next line and began making a list. In the morning she arrived at the estate at 9 o'clock and was met at the gate by a household staff member named Patrick, a young man with good posture and a polite manner who gave her a proper staff badge, a map of the grounds, and a clear verbal briefing on which areas of the estate she would have access to. The badge had her name on it, It also had a small detail she noticed immediately: her title, not contractor or event staff. It said event director. She turned it over and looked at it for a moment, then clipped it to her jacket and followed Patrick inside. The mansion looked different in full daylight with a working brief in her hand. She was not a lost guest now, and she was not an accidental overnight visitor. She was here to do a job, and the simple act of having a purpose in a place changes how you see it. She noticed the proportions of the rooms, the natural light, the acoustics of the main hall. She noticed where the kitchen access points were in relation to the dining areas, and where the staff circulation routes ran without crossing the guest areas. She was taken to a room on the ground floor that had been set up as a planning office, a proper desk, a computer, printed copies of the vendor list she had been promised, and the household staff schedule for the coming 3 weeks. Everything organized, everything ready. She sat down, opened her notebook, and got to work. Mrs. Odette came to find her 2 hours later. Alina had heard of Mrs. Odette. You learned quickly in this kind of environment who the real engine of a household was, and by the second hour of her first morning, Alina had already gathered enough from the staff schedule and the vendor correspondence files to understand that Mrs. Odette ran the internal operations of the estate with the kind of competent authority that made everything else possible. She was a tall, upright woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back neatly, and a manner that was not unfriendly, but was precise in the way of someone who did not have patience for vagueness or wasted effort. She knocked once and came in and looked at Alina at the desk. Alina looked back at her. "You have already identified a gap in the Tuesday rotation," Mrs. Odette said. "The gap has been there for a while," Alina said. "It is causing doubled assignments in the service staff on Thursday mornings. It can be fixed with one shift adjustment." Mrs. Odette looked at her for a moment. "I will have it adjusted this afternoon," she said. "Thank you," Alina said. Mrs. Odette looked at the desk, at the files and notes and the open planning book, with an expression that was hard to read but was clearly not disapproval. Then she turned to leave. "Mrs. Odette," Alina said. The woman turned back. "What does this household need that it has not had?" Alina asked. It was a direct question, and she asked it directly without softening it or making it smaller. Mrs. Odette stood still for a moment, then she said, "Consistency. And someone who does not treat this estate as a stepping stone." "I understand," Alina said. Mrs. Odette gave a small nod, then she left. Alina turned back to her files. Through the window of the planning office she could see the edge of the garden and a section of the long driveway, and beyond it the old stone wall that marked the estate boundary. The sun had moved while she worked, and the room was now bright and warm and completely quiet. She turned to a fresh page in her notebook and began building the event timeline from the ground up. She worked through lunch. She worked until the light changed and the afternoon began to cool. She found 3 vendor inefficiencies in the existing contracts, one with a linen supplier who had been overcharging for delivery, one with a florist whose order confirmation times were consistently too late to allow for alternatives if something went wrong, and one with a catering supply company whose pricing had not been renegotiated in 2 years and was now above market rate. She noted all 3, with specific figures, in a separate section of her planning book. At 5 o'clock she packed up her notes and gathered her things. Patrick was waiting in the corridor to walk her out, but before she reached the exit, she passed the door of the main study. The door was open, and through it she could see a large desk covered in neat stacks of papers, a full wall of shelves lined with files and books, and a man standing at the window with his back to the door, hands clasped behind him, looking out at the evening grounds. He did not turn. She did not stop. But something in the shape of his shoulders, the stillness of how he stood, stayed with her as she walked down the drive to the gate. A man who carried a great deal, she thought, and had long since stopped asking for help carrying it. She reached the road and turned toward the bus stop. 3 weeks, she thought. She had 3 weeks to make this event perfect, and she intended to do exactly that. The vendor meeting was on Thursday morning, and Alina arrived at the estate 30 minutes early. She had spent 2 evenings at her kitchen table going through the existing supplier contracts line by line. She had printed the relevant pages, marked the sections that needed discussion, and organized her notes by priority. Her brother had called on the second evening and found her surrounded by papers, and she had told him she was working on a large event. He had said, "That's my sister," in the warm, uncomplicated way he always said it, and she had felt something settle quietly in her chest. Patrick met her at the gate as usual. The badge was in her jacket pocket now. She had fallen into the habit of putting it there the night before so she did not have to search for it in the morning. Small routines, she built them quickly. It was part of how she worked. The planning office was already set up when she arrived. Someone had left a fresh pot of tea on the desk. She did not know who, and she had learned in the 4 days she had been coming to the estate that certain things were simply done without any announcement, and that the correct response to this was a quiet thank you when she encountered whoever had done it. The vendors arrived over the following hour. She had requested all 3 of the suppliers she had identified issues with, and she had also requested the estate's general events coordinator, a quiet man named Richard who had been in the role for 6 months, and who welcomed her presence at the meetings with an expression of such visible relief that Alina almost smiled. Richard, she had gathered, was competent but overwhelmed. He had taken on a role that was larger than his brief and had been managing without enough support. She did not criticize this. She simply noted it and built her planning around it. The linen supplier arrived first. He was a heavy-set, cheerful man who seemed to operate on the assumption that long-standing relationships were a shield against difficult conversations. He shook her hand with great warmth and launched into a 5-minute account of the history of the estate's relationship with his company. Alina let him finish. Then she opened her notebook to the relevant page and said, pleasantly and clearly, that the current delivery surcharge had been applied at a rate 30% above the standard market rate, that this had been the case for 14 months, and that she would like to discuss a corrected figure before she authorized any orders for the upcoming event. The cheerful warmth on the man's face underwent a subtle but noticeable shift. Alina did not change her expression, she waited. They settled on a corrected figure within 20 minutes. He left looking somewhat deflated but not ill-treated, and Alina noted the new figure in her planning book with a small, satisfied line through the old one. The florist came next. She was more straightforward. Her confirmation timelines were slow because she was managing too many accounts at once, and once Alina explained clearly what the estate's requirements were and what the consequences of late confirmations would be for future orders, the woman agreed to the timeline adjustment without argument, done in 15 minutes. The catering supply representative was the most prepared of the 3, which told Alina he had been warned. He arrived with a revised pricing sheet already printed, which she looked at, set down on the table, and then improved further over the following 30 minutes with enough specific market knowledge to make clear that she had done her homework and was not going to be moved by the first number offered. They ended on a figure that was better than the revised sheet and better than she had expected, and the representative shook her hand at the end with the kind of respect that people offer when they have realized they are dealing with someone who actually knows what they are talking about. Richard walked the vendors out and came back looking as though a weight had been physically removed from his shoulders. "How long have those contracts been structured that way?" Alina asked him. "The linen one for about a year," he said. "The others for a while. I flagged the linen issue, but I was not sure how to approach renegotiating without it seeming like a complaint." "It is not a complaint," she said. "It is management." He nodded slowly. "I see that now." She liked Richard. He was honest about his limitations, which was rarer than it should have been. She made a note to ensure the new supplier terms were formally documented and that he had clear guidance on handling future renewals. She was still working through the afternoon documentation when the door of the planning room opened and Dante Carrero walked in. She had not seen him since the morning of the breakfast. He had been present in the estate during her working days, she assumed, but she had caught only glimpses, a shoulder through a doorway, the sound of his voice from another room, the evidence of his presence in the adjustments that appeared in her planning materials after she had raised something the previous day. He moved through his own estate the way certain things moved, noticed only when you looked for them, but felt as a constant background fact. He came in, looked at the desk, and looked at the figures she had written on the notepad beside her planning book. "You renegotiated all 3 this morning," he said. "Yes," she said. "In 1 morning." "They were not complicated negotiations," she said. "The numbers were clear." Once someone pointed to the numbers and did not move, there was not much argument left to have. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the total saving she had written at the bottom of the page. "Richard has been trying to address the linen contract for a year," he said. Richard is very good at managing what is directly in front of him, she said. He needed someone to stand slightly to the side of the problem and see it more clearly. That is not a criticism of Richard. Dante looked at her. No, he said, I know it is not. He sat down in the chair across the desk, the same chair where the vendors had been sitting all morning, and set a coffee cup on the edge of the desk. He did not ask her permission to sit. She did not expect him to. He was a man who sat in rooms without needing to ask, in the same way that the sun came through windows without knocking. The event plan, he said, you are ahead of schedule. By 3 days, she said, I would rather have the buffer than need it. What concerns you most about this event, he said. She looked at her planning book. The timing on the kitchen service for the 3rd course, she said without hesitation. The current layout means the kitchen team has to cross the main dining room circulation path to reach the service entrance, which creates a cross-traffic problem during the course change. I want to reroute the service path through the secondary corridor. That corridor is usually closed during events. I know, she said. I would like your permission to use it. He looked at her for a moment. You will have it. She made a note. He stayed for another 20 minutes. He asked questions. She answered them. He did not give unnecessary opinions or try to change decisions that were already clearly correct. When she explained her reasoning on something, he listened in his full, undistracted way and either agreed or asked a further question, or once, on the question of the floral arrangement placement, offered a perspective on the sight lines from the head of the table that she had not considered and which was correct, so she adjusted her notes. It was the most productive working conversation she had had in months. She noticed this without drawing attention to it. When he stood to leave, he looked briefly at the total saving on her notepad. Alina, he said. Yes. Thank you, he said, simply and directly without decoration. She looked up at him. It is my job, she said. I know, he said, and the way he said it, not dismissive, but with the weight of something she had not quite heard before, made her pause for a moment after he had gone. She turned back to her planning book. The afternoon light was long and golden through the window. Outside, she could hear the distant sound of the groundskeeper's work, the steady, patient sound of someone who cared about a place enough to tend it carefully. She went back to her notes. She stayed until 7 in the evening, and when she finally left, Patrick walked her to the gate as usual, and at the top of the driveway she passed Mrs. Odette, who was coming in from the garden with a clipboard. Mrs. Odette looked at her. You have stayed late again, she said. There was more to do, Alina said. Mrs. Odette gave the small nod that Alina was beginning to learn was her version of significant approval. Good night, Alina, she said. Good night, Mrs. Odette, Alina said. She walked down the drive. The gate closed behind her. The street was quiet and the evening air was cool and clean, and she had the folder of renegotiated contracts under her arm and her planning book in her bag, and she was, in a way she had not felt at work in a long time, genuinely content. 10 days before the event, a man arrived at the estate who changed the quality of the air. Alina noticed it first in the staff. She had spent enough time in the planning office and the corridors and the service areas to know the rhythm of how the household moved, and she had learned to read small changes in that rhythm the way a musician learned to hear small changes in tempo, not always consciously, but accurately. On the morning Victor Brandt arrived, Patrick was quieter than usual when he met her at the gate. The kitchen staff moved a little faster and spoke a little less when she passed through the service entrance. Mrs. Odette's clipboard was in her hands before she was visible, which meant she was carrying it as something to hold onto. Alina noted all of this without saying anything. She went to the planning office and continued working. She had the service timeline down to a precise 15-minute breakdown, the secondary corridor access confirmed, and the kitchen team briefed twice. The event was on track. The buffer she had built was holding. At 10:30, Richard came to the planning room door. Mr. Brandt is here, he said. She nodded. Is he staying at the estate? For the next 4 days, Richard said. He said it in the voice of a man who was already counting those days. Which room? East wing, 2nd floor. She made a note of this for logistical reasons. The east wing had a separate service access that would need to be managed differently during the event if it was occupied. She adjusted 2 entries in her timeline. Richard watched her do this. You are not concerned, he said. About the service access, she said. About Brant, he said. She looked up. Should I be? Richard was quiet for a moment. He chose his words carefully in the way that people chose words when they were working close to information they could not share directly. He tends to make things more complicated, he said. All right, she said, thank you for telling me. She met Victor Brant for the first time that afternoon. She was in the main hall measuring the distance between the serving station positions and the guest table layout when he came through from the East Wing corridor. He was a large man in his 50s, broad-shouldered, with the kind of physical presence that took up slightly more than its fair share of a room, not through aggression but through a deliberate quality, as if he had decided long ago that the space belonged to him and had been carrying that decision ever since. He stopped when he saw her. He looked at her badge, at the measuring tape in her hand, at her planning book under her arm. New coordinator, he said. He had a slight accent, Northern European. Event director, she said pleasantly. Elena Morris. I am coordinating the dinner for Mr. Carrero. He looked at her with the kind of attention that went past professional interest. It was the look of a man who categorized people rapidly and placed them into positions they had not offered to occupy. She had encountered this look before, in various forms, across 4 years of working in rooms where certain people assumed they owned everything, including the attention of everyone standing in them. She did not change her expression. I was not told there was a new person in the house, he said. I have been working here for just over a week, she said. She marked her measurement in her book and moved to the next position. He followed her movement with his eyes. Carrero usually uses agency staff for events, he said. I am sure he does what is most practical for each situation, she said, making a second measurement. He came a few steps further into the hall. You are very calm for someone who is in a room she does not entirely understand, he said. She looked up at him. I understand the room fine, she said. I have spent a week measuring it. A pause, something shifted in his expression. He was not used to this, she could see that immediately. He was used to a particular kind of response to his presence in a space, and she was not giving it to him, and he was trying to determine whether that was because she did not know who he was, or because she knew and was not impressed. She went back to her measurements. I will need to discuss the guest list with you at some point, he said. There are some additions I would like to make. Guest list changes need to go through Mr. Carrero, she said. I can make sure it is on the agenda for your next meeting. He looked at her for a long moment. I can add people to the list directly, he said. I am sure you can, she said, and I am sure Mr. Carrero would want to know about it. She closed her planning book, tucked it under her arm, and smiled politely. I will flag it for him, thank you, Mr. Brant. She walked out of the hall in the direction of the planning office and did not look back. She did flag it. She sent a brief message through the estate's internal communication system to Richard, who would pass it to the relevant person, noting that Victor Brant had mentioned a possible guest list addition and that Mr. Carrero's guidance was needed. The response came back within 20 minutes. No additions. Guest list is finalized. Pass this to Mr. Brant. She sent it to Richard to pass on and went back to her timeline. That evening she stayed later than usual. She was working through the kitchen coordination sheet with the head chef, a precise, efficient man named Oliver who communicated entirely in quantities and timings, and whom she found deeply satisfying to work with when footsteps sounded in the corridor outside the kitchen. She heard Victor Brant's voice before she saw him. He was speaking to someone in the deliberate tone of a man who was used to his opinions arriving in a room ahead of him. He pushed open the kitchen door and came in without knocking, looked at Elena and Oliver, and addressed Oliver directly. I want the first course changed, he said. I do not eat anything in that food family. Oliver looked at Elena. Elena looked at Victor Brant. The menu was finalized 2 days ago, she said. All guest dietary requirements were collected in advance. If you have a specific medical need, I will note it and adjust your individual plate. He turned to her slowly. I am not talking about a medical need, I am talking about a preference. Mr. Brant, she said, the menu has been confirmed by the host. If you have a medical dietary requirement, I will absolutely accommodate it. A personal preference, however, would need to go through Mr. Carrero. She paused. Would you like me to arrange a conversation with him about it? He looked at her for a long moment. No, he said. Wonderful, she said. Then I will note a preference exclusion for your individual place setting, and Oliver can adjust your plate at the first course. She turned back to Oliver. If you make a note, Oliver, Mr. Brandt's seat placement, first course, individual exclusion. Oliver was already writing. Noted, he said without looking up. Victor Brandt left the kitchen, the door closed behind him. Oliver looked up from his notebook. He has been coming to events here for 3 years, he said. And he has never tried to change the menu before, Elena asked. Oliver looked at her steadily. He has never had anyone to talk to before, he said. She understood. No one had given him a clear, polite boundary before, because no one had been in a position to do so without consequences. She was in a position to do so, and she had done it the same way she did everything, pleasantly, factually, and without any drama. Oliver went back to his notebook. Your kitchen coordination sheet is very good, he said. Thank you, she said. The 15-minute breakdown for the third course is the right call, he said. I have been wanting that secondary corridor for 2 years. We have it now, she said. They worked until 9 o'clock. When she finally packed up her things and said good night to Oliver, she walked through the quiet evening corridors of the estate and thought about Victor Brandt. She thought about the 2 looks he had given her, the one in the main hall and the one in the kitchen, and the thing beneath both of them that she had recognized clearly without wanting to examine too closely. He was used to getting what he wanted. He was not used to being redirected by someone who was not afraid of him. That was something she would keep in mind. She reached the main entrance. Patrick held the door. She thanked him by name, as she always did, because she had learned his name on the first day and used it every time since. She walked down the driveway in the dark, 8 days until the event. On the morning of the event, Elena was at the estate by 6. The day had that particular quality of early mornings before important things, thin light, and a kind of quiet that felt full rather than empty, charged with everything that was about to happen. She stood in the center of the main dining room for a moment before anyone else arrived, with her planning book in her hand and the room in its bare, prepared state around her, and went through the full timeline in her head. She had done this the night before twice at her kitchen table. She did it again now because thoroughness was not the same as anxiety, and she knew the difference. The kitchen team arrived at 6:30. She met Oliver at the service entrance and they ran through the course timing once more, not because either of them needed to, but because it was good practice to say the thing out loud together the morning of an event. Oliver handed her a copy of his own kitchen timeline. It matched hers exactly, which confirmed what she already knew. They were going to be fine. The household staff began setting the dining room at 7. Elena was there while they did it, not directing every small action but present enough to catch anything that needed a quiet word. She caught one misaligned place setting. She caught the lighting at the far end of the room being set too low and adjusted the level until it was correct. She confirmed the secondary corridor access and checked in with the 2 additional service staff she had requested for the corridor route. Richard found her at 8:30, looking slightly pale. What has happened? She said immediately. Nothing has happened, he said, but Mr. Brandt has been in the East Wing corridor since 7 and he keeps looking at the main staircase. Elena thought about this. Is he dressed? Yes. Does he have plans outside the estate today? He did not mention any. Then he is going to be present in the house during the setup, she said. That is fine. Keep the main circulation routes clear and make sure the staff know their assigned areas. He is a guest in the house. He has access to common areas. Just make sure no one discusses the event with him. Richard nodded. You are very calm, he said. Being calm is more useful than the alternative, she said. Go check on the East Wing service access. He went. The guests began arriving at 7 in the evening. Elena was not in the front hall for arrivals. That was the household's role, and she stayed where she was most useful, which was at the midpoint between the dining room and the kitchen, managing the space where the 2 worlds of an event connected. She moved quietly and efficiently, and the staff moved with her in the rhythm they had built over the 2 weeks of preparation. The first 2 courses went out perfectly. She was watching the service entrance timing on the 3rd course when she heard footsteps behind her, and turned to find Victor Brandt in the secondary corridor. He had no reason to be there. The secondary corridor was designated staff only during service, which he had been informed of in the pre-event briefing Richard had circulated. He was dressed for the dinner, which meant he was supposed to be at the table with the other guests. He was not at the table, he was in the corridor. He looked at her, she looked at him. "You are in a service corridor during active service," she said. "I wanted a word," he said. "This is not the time or the place," she said. She had 3 kitchen team members behind her moving through the corridor with the 3rd course, and she stepped to the side to allow them to pass. Victor Brandt did not move. The kitchen team slowed. Elena looked at them and made a small, clear gesture with her hand, "Continue." They moved around Victor Brandt, who seemed to understand that he was now actively obstructing a dinner service, and whose expression shifted slightly in response. "The word can wait until after the service," Elena said. "The dining room is through the main hall to your left." He looked at her steadily. "I have been patient with you," he said. "I appreciate that," she said, "and I have been clear with you. After the service, please." He took a step toward her. The corridor behind him was suddenly not empty. She did not know where Marco had come from. She did not know exactly when he had entered the corridor. But Marco was there, standing 2 steps behind Victor Brandt, with the still, complete presence of someone who had positioned himself very precisely and was in no hurry to explain why. Victor Brandt heard nothing, but he sensed something. She could see it in the slight stiffening of his posture, and he turned. Marco looked at him. Marco said nothing. Victor Brandt was a man who understood certain kinds of silence. He straightened his jacket. "After the service," he said, to no one in particular. He turned and walked back toward the main hall. Elena exhaled once quietly and turned back to the service corridor. The 4th kitchen team member had been waiting politely at a respectful distance during the exchange. She gestured them through and fell back into the rhythm of the evening. The 3rd course went out on time. The 4th course went out on time. The dinner finished at 10:30, which was exactly when her timeline said it would. While the household staff transitioned the dining room for the dessert and coffee hour, Elena slipped through the side access to the main corridor and ran through her post-dinner checklist. Every item was on track. Oliver had already responded to her message about the kitchen wind-down with a single word: "Done." Richard had confirmed the staff rotations for the cleanup. She was standing in the corridor making her final notes when she heard his voice behind her. "Elena." She turned. Dante was standing in the corridor. He had come from the direction of the dining room, which meant he had stepped away from his guests for a moment, which was unusual enough that she paid attention to it. He looked at her, then at the notes in her hand, then back at her. "The 3rd course," he said. "On time," she said. "I heard there was a situation in the secondary corridor." "It was handled," she said. "By you," he said. "By me and by Marco, who appeared in a very timely manner." She paused. "Thank Marco." "I will," he said. Something in his expression was different from the way it had looked across the breakfast table or in the planning meetings. She thought about it for a moment and then understood. He had been watching the whole evening. The coordination, the course timings, the corridor, all of it. He had been present in his own house for his own event and had watched her run it. "The evening was excellent," he said. "The staff made it excellent," she said. "I just made sure things were in the right place at the right time." He looked at her. "That is most of it," he said. She thought about that. "I should get back," she said. "Yes," he said. He stepped to the side to let her pass. She was 2 steps away when he said, "I would like to speak with you when the service is finished, if you are not too tired." She thought about whether she would be tired. She was already tired. She would be more tired by the time the service was finished. She would also, she knew, be too alert to sleep on the bus home. "I will find you," she said. He nodded. She went back to work. The service finished at 11:45. The guests filtered out over the following 30 minutes. Elena stayed until the last of the kitchen team had done their close-down check, and until Richard had confirmed the overnight rotation was in place for the few guests who were staying. Victor Brandt was one of the guests staying. She had not forgotten that. She had also not forgotten that he had come to find her in the corridor, and that whatever he had wanted to say, he had not said it. That was not the same as having nothing left to say. She noted this the same way she noted everything as a fact, as a variable, as something that might matter. She found Dante in the study. The door was open. He was standing at the desk, not sitting, and he had a glass of water in his hand rather than the coffee she associated with his working hours. He looked at her when she appeared in the doorway and gestured to the chair across the desk. She sat down. She was, in fact, tired. She had been on her feet since 6 in the morning, and the kind of concentrated attention that running a large event required was its own kind of exhaustion. She sat with her planning book in her lap and felt the tiredness settle into her legs and her shoulders in the way it did when the focus of an event finally began to clear. Dante sat down across from her. He set his glass down and looked at her for a moment in the full, direct way that she had gotten used to, but still found slightly disconcerting, because it left no room for not being seen. "The event tonight," he said, "how do you think it went?" She answered honestly. The first 2 courses were perfect. The third course had a 3-minute delay at the service entrance that I managed to absorb within the course itself, so it did not reach the dining room, but I want to review the secondary corridor access time with Oliver because it was marginally slower than the timeline projected. The lighting in the far end of the room drifted slightly in the second half of the evening when the room temperature changed. I will add a mid-event lighting check to the standard protocol. The service team performed very well. He listened to all of this. When she finished, he said, "What about Brandt?" "What about him?" "He came to find you in the corridor during the third course." "He was in a staff-only area during active service," she said. "I asked him to return to the dining room." "He did not go immediately." "No," she said. "He went after Marco arrived." Dante was quiet for a moment. "He has been a complicating presence at events here before," he said. "I know," she said. "Richard told me to expect it. I managed it." "You managed him," he said. "Not a correction, more like an observation being turned over slowly." "He responds to clear information given calmly and directly," she said. "Most people do once they understand that the person giving it is not going to move." She paused. "He is used to people moving." Dante looked at her. "So are most of the people I work with," he said. "I know," she said. And then, because she had promised herself when she took this job that she was going to be honest with him in the way she was honest with everyone she worked with, which was to say completely, "I am not going to pretend I do not know who Victor Brandt is. I know the name. I understand enough of the general picture. I am not asking you to explain it to me. But if he is going to be a regular presence at events I manage, I need to understand what limits I have and do not have with him." Dante was still for a moment. He looked at her in the way he had looked at her that first morning in the corridor, with something that was not exactly surprise, because surprise implied he had not expected her to be capable of this, and she did not think that was it. Something more like a kind of focus, like a lens adjusting. "You have the same limits with him that you have with any guest," he said, "which is to say, he is in this house as a courtesy. The house is mine." She let that sit for a moment. "All right," she said. "If he causes a problem," Dante said, "you come to me or to Marco." "I will come to you," she said. "Marco has enough to do." Something moved across his expression. "Marco would be happy to help," he said. "I know he would," she said. "But Marco should not have to stand in a corridor behind Victor Brandt every time Victor Brandt has something he wants to say to me. That is not a long-term solution." She looked at him steadily. "I would rather know what the actual situation is and manage it properly." He considered this for a long moment. She could see him considering it, not just thinking, but genuinely weighing the things she had asked against other things he knew and she did not. Then he gave her the information. It took 20 minutes. He spoke clearly and practically, the way he spoke about everything without hedging or softening. She listened completely and asked 4 questions, all practical, and he answered them all. When it was done, she sat back and said, "All right." "All right," he said. "I understand the situation," she said. "I know what to look for, what not to do, and who to contact if something changes. I am not going to panic. I am not going to run." She looked at him steadily. "And I am not going to stop doing my work." He held her gaze for what felt like a long time, not the short measuring look of an early assessment, but something longer and more complete. "Alina," he said. "Yes." "Why did you call me first?" he said. "When you got the phone call from the agency that day, not someone from your own life, me." She thought about it honestly. "Because I knew you would know what it meant," she said, "and because I trusted that you would tell me the truth about it." He held her gaze for another moment. I will tell you the truth, he said, always. About anything that concerns you. She nodded. Good, she said, then I will do the same. They talked for another 30 minutes. She told him about her brother's degree, which was in its final stretch, and about the thesis defense coming up in 2 months. She told him about the job she had been building toward before the 2 promotions that had not happened, and about the decision she had made to stop being angry about those promotions and start thinking about what she actually wanted instead of what she had been told was the appropriate next step. He told her in the spare, careful way he told things about the 12 countries where the Carrero network operated and about the legitimate businesses, the logistics, the property, the hospitality holdings that made up the visible part of his professional life. He did not go further than that. She did not ask him to. Do you trust me? She said at one point because she was an honest person and it was the honest question. He considered it for a moment. Yes, he said, within the limits of knowing someone for 3 weeks. That is fair, she said. Do you trust me? He said. She thought about it with the same seriousness. I trust that you have been straight with me, she said, and I trust that you were kind to me when you had no reason to be and several reasons not to be. That counts for something. It does, he said. They sat in the quiet of the study for a moment. Outside, the estate was fully dark. The grounds settled into the kind of night quiet that only existed in places with enough land to absorb the sound of the world. Somewhere distantly, one of the overnight kitchen staff was running water. She looked at the clock on the wall, past 1 in the morning. She stood. The last bus, she said. There is a car, he said. She looked at him. I will have someone drive you, he said. It is late. She thought about the bus and the long journey and the tiredness in her legs. She thought about her brother and the thesis defense in 2 months and the invoices on her kitchen table. Thank you, she said. He stood. You did very good work today, Alina. She picked up her planning book. So did your staff, she said. Mrs. Odette runs a very good house. He looked at her. Yes, he said, she does. She said good night and walked out into the quiet corridor. Patrick appeared and walked her to the front entrance, where a car was already waiting, engine running, the driver standing by the open back door. She got in. The estate gates opened as the car reached them and then closed behind her, and she watched them in the rear window as the car moved away down the dark road, the iron bars growing smaller until the trees took them. She turned back to face the front. Her planning book was in her lap. She opened it to the event page and added 2 items to her post-event notes, the secondary corridor timing review and the mid-event lighting check. Then she closed it and sat back and let the car carry her through the dark. The threat arrived on a Tuesday. Not in the form Alina would have expected. Not loud, not dramatic, not the way threats arrived in the stories you read or saw in films. It arrived in the form of a very ordinary phone call from an unknown number while she was sitting in her kitchen eating breakfast 3 days after the event. A man's voice, calm and pleasant and somehow worse for being both. He told her, in the relaxed tone of someone who was reading from a list, that she had been spending a great deal of time at the Carrero estate recently. He told her that he hoped she was enjoying her new position. He told her that people who got close to Dante Carrero sometimes found that proximity inconvenient, and that he hoped she would think carefully about how close she wanted to get. Then he said goodbye and ended the call. Alina sat with her tea, getting cold in front of her, and thought. She was not naive. She had understood since the morning she sat across the breakfast table from Dante Carrero that the world she had walked into had edges she could not see, and that walking close to those edges had a cost. She had understood this, and she had chosen to continue anyway, because she was a person who believed that making a clear-eyed decision was better than making an uninformed one. But a phone call was different from a general understanding. A phone call was specific. It meant that someone knew her number and knew enough about her to find it. She finished her tea, then she called Dante. He answered on the first ring. I received a phone call this morning, she said. A pause, brief. Tell me exactly what was said. She told him exactly what was said. She quoted it as precisely as she could remember. She did not add commentary or interpretation. She gave him the facts. A silence on the other end that was not the absence of something, but the presence of a specific kind of attention. Are you at home? He said. Yes. Stay there, I will send someone. Who is behind it? She asked. Another pause. A name you would not recognize, he said. Someone who wants to disrupt a particular negotiation by creating complications that are harder to address than a direct challenge. And I am the complication, she said. You are being presented as one, he said. You are not one. That is a distinction that might matter less to me than to you, she said. Yes, he said, I know, that is why I am sending someone. He sent Marco and another member of the security team, who arrived at her apartment building 40 minutes later, and did a quiet, thorough check of the building and surrounding street without making a scene or involving anyone who did not need to be involved. Marco came upstairs and stood in her kitchen doorway and asked her if she was all right. I am fine, she said, a bit annoyed. Marco looked at her for a moment. You are always surprising, he said. She packed a bag, not because Marco asked her to, but because she had thought about it while he was doing his check, and had concluded independently that staying alone in her apartment for the next few days was not the most sensible option when someone had just demonstrated that they knew how to reach her there. She called her brother while she packed. He was at the university library. She told him she was going to stay with a friend for a few days. He asked if she was all right. She told him she was fine and that she would explain more later and that he should focus on his thesis. He told her she worried too much about everyone else and not enough about herself. She told him that was not true and that she had to go. She hung up and zipped her bag closed. Marco drove her back to the estate. She had not expected to be back so soon after the event. She had expected at least a week before the next planning stage began. She sat in the back of the car with her bag on the seat beside her and looked out at the city moving past the windows and thought about what it meant to be caught between something large and something safe, and whether those two things were always in opposition, or whether it was possible, sometimes, to find both in the same place. The estate looked the same as always in the daylight. The iron gates, the long driveway, the old stone walls with the old trees behind them. Patrick was at the entrance, and he held the door as she came in, and his manner was exactly what it always was: courteous, professional, uncomplicated. She appreciated that more than she could easily say. Mrs. Odette was in the main hall. She looked at Alina and at the bag on Alina's shoulder, and she said nothing beyond, "Your room is ready," in the tone of someone who had been informed of a situation and had already addressed the practical portion of it. Alina thanked her. She was shown to a comfortable guest room on the first floor with a window overlooking the garden. She set her bag down and sat on the edge of the bed for a moment. This was not what she had planned for this week. She had planned to take 2 days for herself, do some reading, call her brother, start thinking about what she wanted the next stage of her professional life to look like. Instead, she was sitting in a guest room at the Carrero estate because someone who wanted to unsettle Dante Carrero had decided that she was a useful piece to move. She was not going to be moved. She got up, hung up her jacket, and went to find Dante. He was in the study. He stood when she came in, which she had not expected. "Sit down," she said, because she could see he was about to say something careful and prepared. "I am not fragile. Tell me what is happening." He sat. He told her. His name was Arthur Langley. He was a property developer with interests in 3 of the same northern European shipping routes that Victor Brandt controlled access to. He had been trying for 2 years to purchase a logistics corridor that ran through 3 of Dante's legitimate business holdings. Dante had declined to sell. Langley had escalated through intermediaries. Dante had continued to decline. The escalation had now taken a new form. "He does not want to hurt you," Dante said. "He wants to make you a distraction. He wants me to spend time and attention managing your safety instead of managing the negotiation. And if you spend time managing my safety, you are distracted," she said. "Yes." She thought about this. "So the correct response is to make sure I do not need to be managed," she said. He looked at her. "That is what I am trying to do." "No," she said. "What you are trying to do is protect me, which is kind and I appreciate it. What I mean is that I should not become the problem. I should not be the piece on the board that Langley can use to create disruption. Which means I need to understand the actual situation and be capable of participating in my own safety rather than simply being someone you have to keep safe." He was very still for a moment. "What are you asking for?" "Information," she said. "Not all of it. Enough. Where does Langley operate? What does he look like? What are the practical things I should know about my day-to-day situation for the next period? I'm not asking to be involved in anything that is not my business. I am asking to understand my own position." He considered this for a long moment. She could see him genuinely weighing what she had asked against other things he knew, and she did not. Then he gave her the information. It took 20 minutes. He spoke clearly and practically without hedging or softening. She listened completely and asked 4 questions, all practical, and he answered them all. When it was done, she sat back and said, "All right." "All right," he said. "I understand the situation," she said. "I know what to look for, what not to do, and who to contact if something changes. I am not going to panic. I am not going to run." She looked at him steadily. "And I am not going to stop doing my work." He held her gaze for what felt like a long time. Then he said, "Alina." "Yes." "Why do you keep doing that?" he said. "Doing what?" "Choosing to stay," he said. "Most people, given the choice, would walk away." She thought about it honestly. "Because I do not make decisions based on what is easiest," she said. "I make them based on what is right, and I made a clear-eyed decision to be here. I'm not going to let Arthur Langley undo a decision I made with my eyes open." He held her gaze for another long moment. Then he said quietly and completely, "I will not let anything happen to you." She looked at him. In his expression was something she had not seen from him before, not the composed, careful surface, but what was behind it. Something direct and certain, and she thought a little afraid, not of her for her. She understood the difference. "I know," she said, "and I will not let anything happen to your negotiation." For a moment, something in his face was completely unguarded. Then the composure came back, and he nodded, and she picked up her planning book and went to work. Arthur Langley made his second move on a Thursday afternoon. Alina was in the planning office working through the preliminary outline for the next estate event scheduled 6 weeks ahead. She had her planning book open and the household calendar on the screen, and a cup of tea cooling beside the keyboard, when Richard appeared at the door with the expression she had learned to read accurately over the weeks, the expression of someone who had received information they were not sure how to deliver. She turned around. "What happened?" she said. "Someone called the estate's main line," Richard said. One of the kitchen staff answered because the front desk was temporarily unattended. The caller said they were from Alina Morris's doctor's office, and that there was an urgent personal matter that required her to leave the estate immediately for an appointment. Alina looked at him. "No one from my doctor's office would call the estate," she said. "They do not have this number." Richard nodded. He had already understood this. "Who took the call?" she said. "Lucy," he said, "one of the junior kitchen staff. She did not pass the message on because it did not seem right to her. She came to me instead." Alina was already reaching for her phone. She sent a message to Marco with a brief factual summary of what had just happened. The response came back in under a minute, noted, "Stay in building," on it. She put her phone down. "Tell Lucy she did exactly the right thing," she said to Richard, "and thank her." She went back to her planning book. She stared at the calendar for a moment without really seeing it, then took a breath and refocused. The event timeline was not going to plan itself. 20 minutes later, Dante came to the planning office. He came in and stood by the window, looking out at the garden in the way she had seen him do from a distance in her first week, that particular stillness that was not absence but presence held carefully. Then he turned and looked at her. "He is escalating," he said. "But not in the direction I expected. He is trying to get me to leave the estate on my own," she said, "to pull me out of the building into a situation he can control." "Yes, he does not want to come in here," she said. "He wants me to come out there." "Yes," he sat down in the chair across from her desk. "This means 2 things. First, he is not willing to move against the estate directly. That limits what he can do. Second, he is impatient, which means the pressure on his side of the negotiation is higher than I thought. So the way to manage him is to not give him anything to work with," she said. "For the moment, yes." She thought about Lucy, who had answered an unknown call in the kitchen and had been sensible enough to recognize that something did not fit and to take it to someone rather than pass on the message. She thought about the chain of small alertness that had caught the move before it went anywhere. "Your staff are very good," she said. He looked at her. "They are," he said. "They are also very engaged right now, in a way I do not usually see." She was quiet for a moment. "Is that because of me?" she said. He held her gaze. Partly, he said. She thought about Mrs. Odette and the shift adjustment on the first day, about Oliver and the kitchen timeline, about Patrick, who had been the first person to show her the estate with genuine clarity rather than professional distance, about Richard, who had accepted her presence with relief and then built on it into something resembling a real working partnership. "I have not done anything special," she said. "You have done something specific," he said. "You treat people as though their work matters." "Their work does matter," she said. "I know that," he said, "but most people who come through this estate at your level treat the staff as a mechanism, something that runs the house. You treat them as a team." She thought about her 4 years in the catering industry. The long shifts, the invisible work, the way that certain clients walked through a room without seeing anyone who made the room function. She thought about the things that had kept her going in those years, not the prospect of a promotion, not the money, though the money mattered, but the work itself, and the people she did it alongside. "I know what it is like to be the mechanism," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I know," he said. They sat in the comfortable silence that had become familiar over the weeks. Not the silence of having nothing to say, but the silence of two people who had gotten past the need to fill space with words. Then Alina's phone rang. She looked at it, unknown number. She looked at Dante. She answered it and put it on speaker without either of them agreeing to do this. It simply seemed like the obvious thing. She held the phone on the desk between them. The same voice as before, still calm, still pleasant. He said her name. He said he hoped she was thinking carefully about her situation. He said that things could become much more complicated for the people she cared about if she continued to make herself a fixture in places where she did not belong. Her brother's name. The voice said her brother's name. Alina felt something crystallize in her chest. Not fear exactly, something harder and clearer than fear. She breathed in once steadily. Dante's hand was already moving. He was looking at her and reaching for his own phone at the same time, and she saw something in his expression that she had not seen before, something that moved very fast beneath the surface before the composure came back down over it. "My brother is a student finishing his thesis," Alina said into the phone. "He has nothing to do with any of this." "Of course not," the voice said pleasantly. "That is the point." "What do you want?" she said. "I want Mr. Carrero to understand that his current position in the Northern Logistics negotiation has a cost he has not fully calculated," the voice said. "You understand about calculations, I am sure." "I do," she said. "And here is one for you. If anything happens to my brother, you will have made a permanent enemy of me, of this estate, and of every person connected to it. And I will not be a quiet enemy." She said it without anger, without drama, in the same clear, practical tone she used for everything. "I would advise you to leave him out of this." A pause, longer than the previous ones. "Good afternoon," the voice said, and the call ended. Alina set the phone down. Dante was already speaking into his own phone, in a low, rapid voice. She caught enough to understand that the security team was being activated, that names were being mentioned she did not recognize, and that whatever was being set in motion had been waiting to be set in motion, and was now being released with the precision of something that had been ready. He ended his call. He looked at her. "Your brother," he said. "His name is Daniel," she said. "He is 23. His thesis defense is in 6 weeks. "Where is he right now?" "At the university. He is usually in the library on Thursday afternoons." Dante was already typing. "He will have someone near him within the hour," he said. "It will be discreet. He will not necessarily know." "Tell him," she said immediately. He looked up. "Tell him," she said again, "he is not a child. He deserves to know if there is a reason for someone to be near him. He can handle it." Dante held her gaze. "All right," he said. "I will have someone speak to him directly, plainly." "Thank you," she said. She breathed in once again. She looked at the planning book, still open on the desk at the event outline page. The timeline was still there, the same calendar, the same clean columns of information. She was shaking slightly, not visibly, but she could feel it in her hands. She put her hands flat on the desk and pressed until the shaking stopped. Dante was watching her. "I am all right," she said. "I know," he said. "You do not have to be, though, not right now." She looked at him. I find it more useful, she said honestly, to be all right. If I am not all right, I cannot think, and right now I need to think. What do you need? He said. She thought about it. Tell me what you are going to do, she said. Not the details, just the general shape of it. He told her. He was going to accelerate the negotiation directly, cutting out the layers of intermediary that Langley had been operating through to create his disruptions. He was going to make it clear through channels that Langley would understand that the pressure being applied had not created any movement in the negotiation, and was not going to, and that the personal nature of the recent moves had narrowed the range of outcomes Langley was going to have available to him considerably. And Daniel, she said. Daniel will have a quiet, professional presence near him until this is resolved, he said. He will be safe. She sat with this. How long, she said. Days, he said, not longer. Langley is running out of room. She nodded. She looked down at her planning book. She turned to a fresh page and picked up her pen. Dante watched her. You are going back to work, he said. The event in 6 weeks is not going to plan itself, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, and she could hear something in his voice that was not his usual composure, not the absence of composure, but something alongside it, something warm and certain and a little undone, he said. You are the most remarkable person I have met in a very long time. She looked up. He met her eyes directly and did not look away. She held his gaze. 6 weeks, she said. Let us get through the next 6 weeks. He nodded. She went back to her planning book. He stayed in the room, and that, without either of them saying so, was how it began. The negotiation ended on a Wednesday morning. Elena was not in the room when it ended. She was in the planning office working through the catering order, and she heard it in the sound of the house around her, a particular kind of shift in atmosphere, the way a room changes after a long-closed window is finally opened. Something released, something settled. Marco came to the planning room door at 11:30 and told her, with the economical clarity she had come to appreciate deeply, it was done. Langley had withdrawn. Daniel was clear. She thanked him. She finished her catering order. Then she called her brother. He answered on the second ring in his usual cheerful rush. She could hear the library behind him, the particular acoustic quality of a large, quiet room where a great many people are trying to concentrate. Are you all right? He said immediately, because he had spent the last 3 days with a very calm, professional person standing nearby, and he had handled this with much better grace than Elena had expected and much better grace than she had worried about at 3 in the morning 2 nights running. Everything is fine, she said. It is over. Good, he said. Then, the person who was with me, he was very helpful on Chapter 7, actually. He spotted a methodology problem. I had been too close to the material to see. She pressed her hand to her mouth for a moment. I am glad, she said, when she could say it steadily. Will you be there for the defense? He said. I will be in the front row, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Elena, are you actually happy, not managing everything happy, actually happy? She thought about the planning office. She thought about Mrs. Odette's small, significant nod. She thought about Oliver and the kitchen timeline and the secondary corridor. She thought about the quiet study at midnight and the breakfast table the first morning, and the drive home in the dark after the event, and the 2 plain words, I know, said with a weight that meant something entirely different from their surface. Yes, she said, I think I am. Good, her brother said, with the warmth of someone who had wanted to hear that answer for a long time. About time. She went back to work. In the afternoon, Dante came to find her. He came to the planning office in the way he had begun to come to the planning office, without particular announcement, as a natural part of his movement through the house, and sat in the chair across from her desk. He had a folder in his hand, and an expression she had learned meant he was about to make a proposal he had already decided on, but was going to present correctly. She put her pen down. She waited. The role you have been filling, he said. Event director, I would like to make it permanent, full position, director of private events and household operations for all Carrero properties. You would have authority over the events calendar, the household operations schedule, and the vendor network across 4 estates. He set the folder on the desk. The contract is in there, salary, terms, the full brief. He paused. Read it before you answer. She picked up the folder and opened it. She read it. It was thorough, everything was clear and honestly stated. The salary made her sit back for a moment and then sit forward again. The scope of the role was significant, larger than the event director title suggested on the surface, encompassing the operational coordination she had already been doing informally across the estate, formalized and extended to the full network. She read every clause. Then she set the folder down and looked at him. "I have one condition," she said. He waited. "The staffing crew from the original gala," she said. "The ones who were underpaid by the agency before I arrived. I know who most of them are. I worked alongside them for 12 hours. I want their accounts corrected, and I want any of them who are interested to be added to the preferred contract list for events I manage." He looked at her for a moment. "Done," he said. She looked at him. "You were going to say yes to that no matter what it was," she said. "Within reason," he said. "Was that within reason?" she said. "Well, within it," he said. And then, with the closest thing to full warmth she had ever heard from him, "Is that your only condition?" She looked back at the contract. "For the job, yes," she said. She picked up her pen, she signed it on the relevant line, she closed the folder and set it back on the desk. He picked it up. He did not immediately leave. She looked at him. "There is something else," she said. "Yes," he said. She waited. He looked at the folder in his hand, then at the desk, then at her. "I am not a simple person," he said. "You know what my life looks like, or enough of it. I have been careful about certain things for a very long time, and I intend to continue being careful, but I have also been—" He paused, and she could see him choosing words with more attention than he usually gave them, "alone, in this particular way, for a very long time." She kept looking at him. "I am telling you this," he said, "because I think you should know it before anything else becomes something worth saying." She thought about her 4 years of catering shifts. She thought about the brother she had been raising up beside her own ambitions, quietly and completely. She thought about 2 promotions that had not happened, and the decision to work harder instead of being bitter, and the long bus rides home and the planning books, and the way she had walked into a room she had no intention of being in and found, without any plan at all, something she had no language for yet but was certain was important. She said, "I do not need you to be simple, I need you to be honest." "I will be," he said. "Then we will figure the rest out," she said. He held her gaze for a long moment, then he nodded once with a gravity that felt like a promise. He left the planning office. She turned back to her planning book. 6 months later, the Carrero estate was a different place in all the ways that mattered, and exactly the same in all the ways that were worth keeping. The events were flawless. The vendor contracts had been renegotiated across all 4 properties. The household staff worked with the particular ease of people who had the right tools and clear authority and the sense that their work was seen. 3 of the staffing crew from the original gala had joined the events team on preferred contracts. One of them, a young woman named Charlotte who had outstanding organizational instincts, and whom Alina had noticed immediately during that first chaotic overnight shift, was 6 months into an informal mentorship that Alina had begun without naming it, because the best way to teach someone was to simply give them work that mattered and let them rise to it. Richard had been promoted. Oliver had received a budget increase he had been requesting for 2 years. Mrs. Odette had not changed in any visible way, but Alina had noticed that she smiled more frequently, which she suspected was Mrs. Odette's version of a significant transformation. Daniel had passed his thesis defense. He had called Alina at 7 in the morning to tell her, and she had been at the estate when the call came, and Dante had heard her voice from the corridor and known from the sound of it that it was good news without needing to ask. Patrick knocked on her office door that morning. The planning office had been properly designated as her office now, with a small engraved card on the door that said what she did, and told her that the household was assembled in the main hall. She set down her pen. She went. What she found in the main hall was not a formal arrangement and not a ceremony. It was simply the household, Mrs. Odette and Oliver and Richard and Patrick and Marco, and the service team and the kitchen staff and the groundskeeper and the overnight security rotation who had finished their shift, and apparently not yet gone home, gathered in the space with a collective stillness that felt intentional without being performed. Dante was there too, standing to one side, not in the center. He was looking at her. She looked at the room full of people. She did not understand entirely what was happening, but she understood the feeling of it, the particular quality of a room full of people who have decided something collectively, without a meeting or a vote, in the way that groups of people sometimes arrive at a shared understanding through the accumulation of many small, private moments. Mrs. Odette stepped forward. "We wanted to say," Mrs. Odette said, with the specific precision of a woman who had chosen these words carefully and was going to deliver them exactly, "that this house is better for having you in it. That is not a small thing, and we did not want it to go unsaid." Elena looked at the room. She did not cry, she was not someone who cried in front of people. But she stood very still for a moment, and she breathed, and she felt the thing she had been building without knowing she was building it settle into its complete shape. She said, "Thank you, every one of you." She looked at Dante across the room. He looked at her. In his expression was everything she had learned to read over the months, the depth, the restraint, the specific and serious warmth that he gave to things only when they had earned it completely. And something else now, plainer than she had seen from him before, clear and unguarded for exactly one moment before the composure came back, pride, not the pride of ownership. The pride of someone who had watched a person step fully into themselves and was grateful to have had a view. She nodded once. He nodded back. She turned back to the room. "All right," she said. "There is a pre-event review at 10, let us get to work." And the mansion, in its way, bowed. Not with a gesture, not with any formal motion, but in the way that a place bows to a person who belongs in it, by simply moving the way it moves around someone it has recognized, without any need to say so, as its own. She had not gone looking for any of it. She had gone looking for a rest. She had found, instead, the exact life that fit her, waiting in the wrong room in the right house, for the right person to stumble in and stay.